All right, let's keep going here with our next part of the colonization. We kind of wrapped up Africa here. Let's look at Asia. So here's our map of Asia. And when you talk about the colonization of Asia, who's going to be colonizing Asia? Well, the British again are going to be involved, the French a little bit, the United States is going to be involved in here a little bit as well. And we didn't see a lot of U.S. In the area of Africa, but in Asia we will see more U.S. involvement. But one of the important questions to ask right off is who is the strongest country in Asia in the 1800s? And a lot of times people will say, well, it's China. Well, no, it's not. If I were to ask you that question most times in history, you'd be right. Most times in history, China was the strongest nation in Asia. But by the 1800s, China was very weak and very vulnerable. The strongest country in Asia was Japan. Japan was very imperialistic, very powerful. And when we talk about who's colonizing Asia in the 1800s, yes, the British, yes, the French, yes, the Germans, even a little bit. But it's really Japan. Japan is the most aggressive one. And Japan is going to try to dominate this region. And this is going to be very important for a future lecture. So kind of keep that in mind. Again, we're talking about impacts of the colonization in these areas. You always want to stay focused on that. What is the deal with China? Why was China so vulnerable? And how is China going to be colonized? So we'll start about how China is going to be colonized. We'll talk about the British, and then we'll get into other events as well. So China. So what's the deal with China? So China had this dynasty called the Manchu or Qing dynasty that they were in control of China for centuries. And for a long time, they were very strong. But by the 1800s, this dynasty was becoming very weak, very complacent, very arrogant, very closed. They wouldn't modernize. They didn't industrialize. Remember when I talked about the Industrial Revolution? I showed you the industrialization chart, and China was going down, not up. That's because of the failure of the Manchu dynasty. They were very weak, and they were not a strong civilization. And so because of that, the British smell blood, and the British are like, ooh, we could take advantage of this, and this leads to what we call the Opium War. The Opium War, 1839. And what is the Opium War about? Well, not really about opium. Yes, it is, and no, it isn't. What do I mean by that? The British were getting things from China, specifically tea. And the British want to sell stuff into China, opium, and many other products as well. And China's like, no, 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 we don't want stuff from you. And China was very closed. They didn't want the Westerners selling stuff into China. And the British are like, well, we got all this cool stuff now. We want to sell it. And China said no. So this leads to the Opium War. It could have been about anything. It could have been about banana peels. Based on what I already told you about, we know England is strong and powerful. We know China is weak. Not a surprise. After about a year, China is forced to sign what is called the Treaty of Nanking. What is the Treaty of Nanking? Well, the Treaty of Nanking is a treaty where England managed to colonize China. Now, when I say colonize China, what do I mean? Well, they're not going to colonize all of China, right? There's hundreds of millions of people in China. You're going to colonize, you can't colonize all of it. It's going to be impossible to control. The British knew that. What they're going to colonize are just these regions of Hong Kong and Canton. Hong Kong in the news a lot if you're paying attention. Hong Kong and Canton. What's the deal with those? Well, let me show you where they are in the map, and then you'll understand what the British are doing. So if you look at the Treaty of Nanking, Hong Kong, Canton, there's also Shanghai up here. All of these areas in 1842 go to the British. They're just little specks on the map. You don't even see them colored in the yellow area there that the British represent. Everything colored in yellow shows the British colonization. And you don't see anything in China. What's the deal? Well, the British aren't going to colonize all of China. They're just going to take control of the ports. Because if you could take control of the ports, then you could sell your goods. Now, this sets off a domino effect. Once the British do this, what do you think all these other European powers want? They want the same rights. We want to be able to have control of these ports. We want to have control of these ports. And so slowly, a lot of these ports along the East China Sea are being picked apart by these European powers. And China is helpless to stop them because, again, they're not advanced. They don't have a strong military. Now, the deal is these ports don't belong for the British forever. Remember, we eventually get to decolonization, and eventually Hong Kong, this happens much more recently in history, around 1990, 90s, goes back to China. Why is this important? Well, think about this. In the time period between the end of colonization and Hong Kong getting its independence, things change dramatically. China becomes a communist nation. The British is a democracy. So Hong Kong is under British democracy. Hong Kong enjoys all the rights of a British democratic society. They enjoy the right of free press, free association, free speech, all these ideas that you can go out and say what you'd like to say, right? Without having to worry about somebody trying to kill you because you say something that's unpopular, right? That's what was going on there. Well, in China, you don't have those rights. Maybe go, if you haven't heard of Tiananmen Square, or look up Tiananmen Square, right? You don't have those rights in China. And so people in Hong Kong, once they go back to China, said, okay, well, we want to be part of China. We're Chinese, but we want to keep these rights. And at first, China said, no problem. But what happens over the years is China has kind of tried to come against Hong Kong, limiting their rights, which leads in more to people, a lot of people in Hong Kong saying, what's going on? We want our freedoms, we want our rights, and China doesn't want to offer them those. So this is kind of oftentimes a very tense place now because of this. So this is kind of one of the long-term impacts of the colonization issue. So anyways, that's pretty important. Okay, so that's one. So the British are colonizing China, and then other Europeans follow suit by taking over a lot of these areas. The other place that the British are going to colonize that I want to talk about is India. Now, the British have been in India for a while. Let's go to our kind of map just of India. And they started moving into India back in the 1600s in what is called the British East India Company. So you get the British East India Company, they go in and they basically run India. And the British East India Company is not doing a very good job of it. They are treating the locals there very poorly. They're not, doing that British style well at all. And the people in India don't like this. Well, eventually this explodes. One of the impacts of British colonization is something called the Sepoy Rebellion. This kind of interesting little story if you've never heard of it before. So what is the Sepoy Rebellion? The Sepoy Rebellion is Sepoy is a Hindu soldier in Britain, in India, right? A Hindu soldier in India, in British India. And the Sepoys, were given a new rifle called the Enfield rifle. Now, the way a rifle is loaded, let me explain this story to you, then I'll explain to you why it's such a big issue. The way an Enfield rifle is loaded is it's just a rifle. You have your powder in a little plastic bag, and you have to put this baggie in your mouth and rip it open with your teeth, pour the powder into the barrel of the gun, use the ramrod, and fire off a shot. And it was designed that you just open these packages with your mouth. All right. To make it easier to open up the packages, when the British East India Company provided these new rifles to the Sepoys, they lined them with animal fat, pig and cow fat. And so far, a lot of you thinking, what's the problem? Well, at this time in India, in the history of India, the primary population in the 1800s were both Muslims and Hindus. More Hindus, but there was also Muslims in there as well. For Hindus, cow, sacred. For Muslims, pig, forbidden to eat. And so here's the British East India Company lining packages telling people they have to put this animal fat in their mouth that the people there, for one reason or the other, objected to. So they rebelled. You get the Sepoy Rebellion, we're not fighting for you, and all of a sudden the British East India Company, who's basically been running India, is just kind of a mess. The British government comes in and says, quit it, you guys are not doing a good job. The British government then takes more direct control of India. All right, do things improve? Yeah, things improve a little bit, but again, colonization is colonization, right? So the British colonize India, and the British government maintained control of India for a very long time. So one of the impacts is the Sepoy Rebellion. The other impact of British colonization is what happens when they decolonize and how that happens. So how does decolonization happen? Well, of course, right after World War II, the British leave. Person who played a big role in this, of course, is this very well-known man is Gandhi. Gandhi played a big role in getting the British out of India. And this is kind of an interesting thing when you talk about historical figures. And, an individual like Gandhi for very many, many years has always been put on a high pedestal because he had this idea of non-violent, peaceful resistance to get the British out. And it worked. Martin Luther King Jr., non-violent, peaceful resistance, made tremendous positive changes in the United States, right? But there are also ideas that Gandhi had that, were not so good that a lot of people aren't aware of. One of the things he said, and this is kind of shows how any idea that on the surface sounds good, at a certain point doesn't. Because one of the things Gandhi did is he told the Jewish people during World War II, as they were being put in gas chambers, practice nonviolent peaceful resistance. Well, guys, there's no common sense to that, right? I mean, you have to understand how to deal with injustices in a society. If you are being put in gas chambers, if you are being summarily rounded up and killed, nonviolent peaceful resistance is not going to be effective. If you are simply trying to get a people out of your nation who are not trying to kill you, this may be more effective. But Gandhi didn't kind of, understand the difference with that, I think. And there's some other issues with him as well. But again, this is so true of so many historical figures. Guys, if we go through every historical figure and try to, find this perfect person without any flaws, you're never going to find somebody. This is the whole thing again with these statues that we have of all our individuals in history, from Washington to Jefferson to Roosevelt to Franklin Roosevelt to Martin Luther King to Ronald Reagan. Guys, there's flaws in every single one of them in terms of our times today. There's a passage, I think it's in Exodus, I'm sorry if I'm the wrong one, but it talked about Noah and talked about Noah being a great man of his generation. And the point of that was of his generation. And so you always have to take things into their content and look at what were the message at the time, because of there's no perfect people. And if we start tearing down everybody that isn't from today, there isn't going to be much history standing up. So just something to think about. You just study everything. You study the good and the bad on all these individuals. All right. The other really important part of when the British leave is this point I have on this map here. So here you see India, and here you see India and Pakistan. So one of the things that happens when the British leave, remember I said there were Muslims and Hindus in India? They didn't like each other. I covered this in my History of the Middle East class, actually. If you get a chance to take that class, it's called History 165. I usually teach it every spring semester, and it's a very interesting course. And one of the topics I cover is when the Mughal dynasty moves in, you don't need to know that term for this class, moves into India and brings in their Muslim faith. Well, you had Hindus there and creates a lot of conflict. And so what this eventually leads to as a result of decolonization are two countries, India and Pakistan. There's a region in between called Kashmir there, and ever since this separation right after World War II, these two countries of India and Pakistan have been at each other in several wars, and it's another one of these areas that's pretty intense. And so this is, again, one of the long-term ramification of colonization, and decolonization is what happens when you leave. It's not always smooth. You draw a line and go, okay, where does India end? Where does Pakistan begin? Well, it's never going to be perfect. You're going to upset somebody, if not both people. And so this is going to lead to wars and conflicts that's still, pretty tense, into very, very recent times. So anyway, so that's important to note as well. All right, so that's a little bit there about India, and definitely the British involved there. So the British are involved heavily in China, and the British are involved in India. And again, these are all the ramifications. That's the key thing you want to know, impacts of all of this. The French, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just real quick. What part of Asia did the French colonize? Southeast Asia. That's all you need to know right now. So Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, these areas in Southeast Asia, that's where the French are going to be most dominant. Just know that now. Last couple lectures of the semester, when we talk about the Vietnam War, I'll probably mention this again. But for now, as long as you know that, you're good to go. All right? Next. U.S. and Japan and more impacts on China. So this is really important in terms of the colonization period. So what about the United States? Well, the United States, they want to colonize as well. And for the United States, colonizing Japan was not about, colonizing Asia was not about taking over land. Colonizing Asia was about an idea known as the open door policy. And this is right around the year 1900, if you want just round numbers, circa 1900 AD, where the U.S. had this concept of the open door. What is that? That we want to have open markets globally, but especially in China. And we want an open door that anybody, not just the United States, anybody can go in and out of these areas. And it was an idea that the United States liked, a lot of European powers liked. Who did not like this idea? Well, China, but also Japan. Japan hated this idea. Why did Japan hate this idea? Because Japan wanted to dominate this region. Remember, Japan is incredibly imperialistic at this time. They wanted to control all of Asia. They wanted to dominate all of Asia. They didn't want anybody left, especially the United States, in their neck of the woods, so to speak. And so Japan hates this idea. Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States, loves this idea. When he becomes the president in the U.S., right, 1901-ish, he's president of the United States. And Theodore Roosevelt, he really wanted this concept, and what he does is really begin to push it. How does Theodore Roosevelt push this idea of the open door policy? He'll go to entrepreneurs like J.P. Morgan and tell them, go build a railroad there, right? Go build a big railroad there. That's something he does. He takes the American Navy and he paints it white. Makes it called the Great White Fleet. And this Great White Fleet sails on this global tour. And one of the areas that the Great White Fleet sails through, right through the Sea of Japan. Why is he sending them there? Well, he wants to show Japan, flex the muscles. This is our new modern Navy. So sometimes Theodore Roosevelt, sometimes known as gunboat diplomacy, where, what was Theodore Roosevelt's motto? Speak softly and carry a big stick. And so, you talk nicely, you say the right things, but if somebody isn't doing what you do, you whack them upside the head with a stick. And that's Theodore Roosevelt. And using that philosophy, he does get the open door policy to begin to grow inside of Asia. And it ends up being very beneficial for a lot of people, both in Asia and the United States and in Europe, because it does open up markets, more goods. A lot of people have more things. Look at all the stuff we have today from all over the world, right? And so in many ways, yes, it worked, but in many ways, it also alienated Japan. Why does this matter? Well, think of the impacts of this. This means Japan and the United States are at odds. And well, eventually this is going to, you can probably see where this is going. It's going to get us to World War II. Yeah, guys, Japan didn't wake up one day in December of 1941 and say, let's bomb Pearl Harbor, right? This is a buildup. In 1900, open door is one of the first times that you're starting to really get this tension developing between the United States and Japan. You add to the mix just this really imperialistic, and you're going to see very brutal Japan that we're going to talk about later on. It's going to be a big problem. So anyway, so you have that as one of the key things that's going on there. So that's going to be important. You want to remember that. Another part of the impacts of colonization is what happens in China. So that whole thing with the open door, Theodore Roosevelt, that all relates to Japan. What about these two terms, Boxer Rebellion, Follow Manchu, and the rest of these terms? Well, these terms have to do with one of the biggest impacts on China. So let's say you're China, it's the 1800s, you're going through this colonization period, you're being colonized, it's not a good time for you. You're going to be upset. Who are you going to be upset at? You're going to be upset at the Westerners, right? You're going to be upset at the Westerners because they're coming in and they're colonizing you. But you're also going to be upset at your own government. How did you let this happen? So the Boxer Rebellion was, again, around 1900, 1901, if you want to get specific, right? And again, you just need proximate dates for all these. If this comes up as an ID or something, 1900, 1901 is fine. Again, I don't write every single thing down here. That's why you're supposed to be taking good notes. And the Boxer Rebellion, is a group of people known as Boxers in northern China that captured quite a few Western missionary workers and held them hostage for about a year. It took a major effort to get them out, and it was just a reaction to the colonization. Leave us alone. Go away. We don't want you here. And so that's one impact of colonization, something like the Boxer Rebellion, where the people in China get sick of the Westerners coming in. The other impact is the fall of the Manchu dynasty. And not a surprise, right? I mean, the Manchu dynasty is a miserable failure at this point, and people want to get rid of it. Now, what happens is interesting because pretty much there was this universal agreement in China, Manchu dynasty's got to go. What are they going to replace them with? Well, this is where you get into an interesting story. There was this man named Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek was a man in China who had a political party known as the Kuomintang. I just abbreviated the KMT. If you remember that, that's fine. The KMT party. And they wanted to bring a more Western democratic China. All right, more democracy. All right, sounds good. There was another guy in China. I guess there's a lot of you haven't heard of Chiang Kai-shek. There was another guy in China around the same time after the Manchu dynasty falls named Mao Zedong. Probably heard of him. And he says, well, yeah, it's good that the Manchu dynasty is gone, but I don't want a Western democratic nation. I want communism. And Mao begins to push that. And there's a war between the forces loyal to Mao and the forces loyal to Chiang Kai-shek. Long story short, Mao's going to win this conflict. Mao wins this conflict. The forces loyal to Chiang Kai-shek are forced to flee. Where do they go? They go to Taiwan. That's where they still are to this day. Meanwhile, what does this mean? It means China falls under this horrific, brutal ideology of communism, right? Again, it's always shocking to me that people, after everything that has happened in the 20th and into the 21st century now under the communist ideology, that there's still people out there that go, oh, Marxism, communism, they're really not that bad. You know, we think of how many people Hitler murdered, and, you know, you're talking about, 15 million civilians, forget the World War II numbers, which would increase it. Stalin killed about 20 million. Guys, Mao killed even more. We don't even know how many people Mao murdered. Mao murdered maybe 40, 50, 60 million people. It's countless numbers, and he does it all in the name of communism. And so Mao is historically one of the most brutal, suppressive individuals in human history. This is that communist philosophy that he spearheads. Now, would that have happened without colonization? Because again, this is the impacts. And look, the Manchu dynasty was going to fall with or without colonization. The Manchu dynasty was its kind of own demons. Colonization helped the Manchu dynasty fall faster. If it fell in a different way, maybe something else takes over China. Who knows? Maybe, a communist force still takes over China. Maybe not Mao, maybe somebody else. Who knows? But definitely one of the things that helped the fall of the Manchu dynasty was the colonization period, because people were sick of it. Again, I don't want to put it all on the colonization period. The Manchu dynasty, again, in many ways was their own worst enemy. They could have industrialized, they could have modernized, and then, things go differently as well for that. So that's just important to note as well. All right, so these are the long-term impacts, right? This is the thing you always want to think about. Impacts, impacts, impacts. All right, so I hope all that's clear. Last bit, not much, Latin America. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's more for maybe U.S. history, but it's still important. Spain's involved in Latin America. One area Spain is involved in is in Cuba. And Cuba, of course, is a little island off the coast of Florida that was independent for a long time. The United States had good relations with Cuba. Spain moves in. The United States not happy, Cuba not happy. What does these lead to? Eventually, the Spanish-American War. The way the war started was there was a U.S. ship called the Maine. The Maine exploded, and immediately the United States said Spain did this. Spain did not do it. It was a big old accident, but it was the reason that the U.S. wanted to use to declare this war. The war is fought. It lasts for about a year. And interesting, this war was very successful from the U.S. perspective. The United States won. Cuba gained independence. The United States also acquired the Philippine Islands as a result of the Spanish-American War. So that's the basic stuff. I definitely want you to know all that. But there's one other thing I want you to know about the Spanish-American War. Theodore Roosevelt was part of this war. And Theodore Roosevelt gave the Spanish-American War a nickname. He called it a splendid little war. And that sounds odd, but for a war to be called anything like that, but in many ways it was. And what I mean by that, it was fought for about a year, very few casualties, more people died from malaria than actual fighting. And at the end, the United States won, and these two powers, the United States and Spain, fought this war, and it wasn't this end of days type thing. And this was in around 1900. So I just kind of remember this. Remember that story. It's going to come back in another lecture, the term Splendid Little War. So that's one thing that's going on in Latin America. There is one other really interesting story in Latin America. It really doesn't have to do anything with European powers, but it's an important little story, so I'm going to share it with you. And that's the story of the Panama Canal. So right around the turn of the century, we get the story of the building of the Panama Canal. And so Panama, of course, here, right over here, you can see on the map, of course, was this nation that was under the control of Colombia. And around the turn of the century, a lot of people thought, boy, it would be a good idea to build a canal here, right? I mean, North and South America, it cuts right in between. If we build a canal, it would take the time to trade from the East Coast to the West Coast dramatically. Instead of having to go all the way down south to Latin America and all the way around, you could just cut through the canal, right? So it saves a lot of time, a lot of travel. Great. The problem is Colombia owned Panama. And so the United States, who really wanted this, goes to Colombia. And they say to Colombia, hey, we'd like to build a canal through Panama. Will you give us permission? And we'll pay you. We'll pay you money. We'll pay like $10 million. We'll lease it from you. We'll give you money. Can we build a canal here? And Colombia said no. Okay. Then Theodore Roosevelt became president. Theodore Roosevelt really wanted a canal there. And so we get this story of a man named Felipe Buenaventura who lived in Panama. The guy was from France. This guy, Philip Buenaventura, one day takes a trip to Washington, D.C. Takes a trip to Washington, D.C., meets a number of very important people there, comes back home to Panama. Gets back to Panama, and all of a sudden, must have just been a coincidence, rebellion breaks out in Panama. People rebelling against Colombia. Well, Colombia says, well, we're not going to have that. We're going to go our men on our boats, and we're going to go here, and we're going to get our ships here, and we're going to stop the rebellion from succeeding. Well, the U.S. Navy was there. Must have just been a coincidence. And sorry, Colombia, no parking for you. We're already here. And what's Colombia going to do? Take on the United States? Not going to happen. And so the rebellion succeeds. Panama gains its independence. Philip Buenaventura becomes a very key person in Panama. The United States goes to Panama now after they gain their independence, say, hey, Panama, we want to build a canal here. We'll give you $10 million. We'll lease it from you. Anybody can use it. What do you say? And of course, they said yes. So I remember once hearing this, that basically Theodore Roosevelt stole Panama fair and square. That he really wanted a canal there. He understood the significance of it. Colombia was not interested in playing ball, and he wasn't interested in waiting forever. And so he had this coup essentially orchestrated so we can get the canal there. Now, the canal is amazing. And one of the things, just aside from the politics of it, the science of it is amazing. The building of a canal at that time through what have they done? They've sliced the continent. They've took North and South America, sliced it in half, guys, right? Remember this optimism idea that anything is possible? Well, anything is possible. You can even cut a continent in half. And so the Panama Canal, it's an interesting story. It's another important example of this optimism from a Western civilization perspective that you could do anything. The canal becomes really important later on when we get to World War II, because without the Panama Canal after Pearl Harbor, we would have been very hard pressed to fight Japan well. So one of the other unintended consequences of the canal. But just this ability to create it was very hard, technological masterpiece building the canal, and it was done. And so I think that's an important part of our story as well. So anyways, that's quite a bit there I gave you on colonization. So I broke it up into a couple lectures for you. Obviously, you want to know all of that stuff. You want to know about the causes again, the different methods to colonize Africa, the colonization in Asia, the impacts of the colonization in Asia, anything in your textbook, any primary sources you could add, all very important stuff to incorporate if you have an essay on this. All right? All right, hope all that's clear. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.